All right, the regular meeting of the Capital Long Range Improvements Committee will now begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeffrey Strand. I'm the chair of the Capital Long Range Improvements Committee. Before we begin, I'd like to note that this meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota statute, section 13D.021. Due to the declared local health pandemic, I will now call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to call a roll so that we may verify the presence of a quorum.
Thorbjorn Adam.
Present.
Jocelyn Beard.
Present.
John Bernstein.
Here.
Steve Brandt. I thought I heard you on your Steve Brandt. James Brown.
Just a reminder for those who are calling in, if you need to unmute, use *6 if you're dialing in to unmute. *6.
Luke Cunningham.
Present.
Sonia DeGarmo.
Here.
Present.
Scott Engel. Scott Engel. Amity Foster.
Here.
William Gullickson. William Gullickson. Risa Hustad.
Here.
Katie Jones.
Present.
Matt Kazinka.
Here.
Richard LaRoe.
Here.
Erica Mauter.
Here.
Dan McConnell.
Here.
Dan Miller.
Here.
George Montague.
Here.
Beth Toso.
Here.
Todd Schumann.
Here.
Eric Wan.
Here.
Vice Chair Willie Bridges.
Here.
Chair Jeff Strand.
I am present.
Quorum is established. There are 22 members present.
And Scott Engel is here.
Excuse me, this is Steve Brandt. Could I verify that I was recorded as present? I was having some trouble getting in.
Yep, you're recorded.
Great.
Okay.
This is Zachariah Aiden. Just wanted to confirm. I didn't hear my name called.
So the reason you weren't called yet is because your appointment is actually going through POGO today. So you will be called next Friday, or you'll be the next meeting. You would be on the actual roll call.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you.
All right, staff. So we have a quorum present. We have the second item is adoption of the agenda. To expedite the matter, is it possible to do this action by unanimous consent without objection, clerk?
Justin, do you know the answer to that?
Or may we combine 2 and 3?
Yep. Last week we did combine 2 and 3. We do need one roll call vote for both.
Very good. So with unanimous consent, if there's no objection, we'll combine adoption of the agenda, acceptance of the minutes from April 7th. When you make your motion, please indicate your name, and with the second, similarly do that. So is there a motion to adopt the agenda and minutes?
I move to adopt the motion in minutes. This is Dan Miller.
I second. This is Willie Bridges.
So we have a motion properly second. Is there any discussion? Seeing no hands raised, the clerk will call a roll.
Thorbjorn Adam.
Aye.
Jocelyn Beard.
Aye.
John Bernstein.
Aye.
Steve Brandt.
Aye.
James Brown.
Aye.
Luke Cunningham.
Aye.
Sonia DeGarmo.
Aye.
Scott Engel.
Aye.
Amity Foster.
Aye.
William Gullickson. William Gullickson. Risa Hustad.
Aye.
Katie Jones.
Aye.
Matt Kazinka,
Aye.
Richard LaRoe,
Aye.
Erica Mauter,
Aye.
Dan McConnell,
Aye.
Dan Miller,
Aye.
George Montague,
Aye.
Beth Toso,
Aye.
Todd Schumann,
Aye.
Eric One,
Aye.
Vice Chair Willie Bridges,
Aye.
Chair Jeff Strand,
Aye.
William Gullickson. With that, there's 22 votes, or 22 ayes.
Very good. That is adopted. So the next item is the presentation, and I'm on behalf of the CLIC committee pleased to welcome Mayor Jacob Fry, Council President Lisa Bender, and Councilmember Steve Fletcher. And welcome elected officials. And we would very much enjoy hearing your comments and priorities for the 2021 CLIC session.
Thank you, Mr. Strand, and thank you for chairing here today. First, want to just start out by thanking the entire CLIC team here. The work that you do is really about the nuts and bolts of city operation. It's about the long-term investments that we're making as a city, and that work is really more critical right now than ever. I myself was a CLIC member. My wife was also a CLIC member. She actually took my spot. And whether you're doing transportation or HD, that work, it really charts a course for where we're going to go. And I can't think of a more important time than doing this work right now for a number of reasons. One, we do have some significant budget shortfalls. Hopefully those budget shortfalls will be addressed in the very near term so they don't become kind of capital long-term issues. Normally on any annual basis, we receive about half of our revenues from property taxes. The other half we get from other sources, parking fees, entertainment taxes, that kind of thing. And in large part, those numbers have been decimated over this last year. And so at least in terms of our annual budget, and I know you guys can at times operate beyond the annual budget, but at least in cases of our annual budget, we've had to make some pretty serious reductions across our city just to combat the realities that we're seeing due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, secondly, as we recover and as we rebuild, we don't want to go back to normal. We fully recognize that some of these deep and systemic inequities, these deep racial inequities that have been seen really over generations for hundreds of years, they are in large part due to decisions that we collectively have made. And so we want to do everything possible right now not to return to that old normal, but to do this necessary transformative work so that we're placing communities of color not just at the table, but also as key beneficiaries in the process. And so the work that you are doing is just so important. I'll tell you that when we get CLIC recommendations, they by and large are adopted with very few modifications. We get the CLIC recommendations, they come on my desk. Those recommendations, in most cases, I hesitate to give you a percentage, but I would venture to guess that probably 95% or more of what you provide to us in terms of recs do go in to recommended short and long-term budgets. And so I apply them, the council adopts them, and they're valued because you all have kind of that very micro level of knowledge from doing the on-the-ground research that you do. And I'm not sure, I know there have been some modifications as to how you do your work. We used to have kind of this ranking scenario, and there would be parameters from which you could rank and how much dollars to allocate and how urgent it was. I assume most of those is still in place in some form, but that work matters, whether it's regarding roads or a sewer system or the human development work that you are always doing. It really matters. Nobody is better at doing it than you are, and I just want to say thank you. We really appreciate your work, and it's that work that helps to set the long-term trajectory of where our city is going to go. And so thank you. Really honored to work with you, and I'll pass it off to Council President Bender.
Thanks, Mayor. Similarly, yeah, I just want to thank you all for all the time that you provide to our city and your volunteer hours and the leadership that you're giving our community in constrained budgets. Your voice really matters more than ever. And I also think the policy guidance and the kind of policy approach you have taken to recommendations is really important during a time where we have a federal administration that is now interested in investing in infrastructure, which brings a lot of potential opportunity to local governments. So the time that we have all put into adopting infrastructure plans, everything from transportation, which is much more visible to most people, to the stormwater system, which I think people take for granted. You are the ones who really get into the details and weeds and see the full picture of the challenges and the potential to implement our vision for a more sustainable and equitable city through our infrastructure investments. So I guess I do want to emphasize a few things beyond those sort of general thanks. I think, as the mayor said, often the CLIC recommendations are move forward without much change. I think there was some change last year, which has some impacts on infrastructure projects. And so I've been on the council this will be my 8th year. This will be my eighth and last budget. As council members are in that, so I mean, we see the mayor's proposed budget. This last year it came a little later, but August through September time, then we have a lot of discussion throughout the fall, and then all of a sudden everyone starts paying attention to the budget in those last couple of months, which become very busy for council members, and we're just inundated with requests for meetings and lots of communication about the budget, often, in a billion, much bigger than $1 billion budget, for $100,000 for this, $5 million for that, lots of feedback about things that are generally not in the capital budget. So I actually think it's really valuable and important when CLIC members reach out to their council members throughout the budget process, maybe proactively schedule some meetings, especially as we get into that crunch time right before the budget. Maybe think about requesting to have a meeting on the calendar for, November or something, just so you know that you have a time set aside to check in with your council member about the capital recommendations you've made versus what was in the mayor's budget and what you might want your council member to just make sure they're paying attention to or know as they're getting inundated with so many things about the budget. I also think, I'm sure you've read in the press and are aware that there's some conversations about the water yard project that has been going through this body. And I think, if members of this committee have a perspective to offer on decisions that are coming that are related to CLIC's purview, that is also valuable. I mean, you're here to provide feedback and input to the elected officials. And so I guess I just want to emphasize that I feel it's really important and valuable to hear from you throughout the year on issues that are related to our capital infrastructure, whatever those may be, whatever your perspective might be on the decisions that are coming to council. So those are some of the thoughts I wanted to offer. And again, just appreciate all of your efforts and time. And I know we have Councilmember Fletcher. We have reorganized the city council many times since the pandemic hit because of the our virtual environment. It's one of the ways that we've adjusted to the pandemic. And Councilmember Fletcher now serves, and of course, Councilmember Warsame resigned, and there's a new Ward 6 council member. So he was previously at some of these as our Ways and Means chair. Councilmember Fletcher is now the finance subcommittee chair of our Policy and Government Oversight Committee. So he's here in that role. He now serves on the Board of Estimate and Taxation, where we set the maximum levy. Another place where your voice is welcomed and important, has a lot of impact on our overall ability to spend and implement the ideas in our capital budget. So happy to welcome and recognize Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Council President. And I'll really echo the gratitude that the mayor and Council President shared. Really appreciate the work that everybody's doing. And I just want to add, I really love this process because we talk about participatory democracy and participatory budgeting, and how do we include more people in decision making? How do we give more people access to decision making? And this is one of the ways that our city does it really well. That's kind of innovative and interesting, and it's really a mutual investment that you make in us of your time and energy, and that we make in you to really help you become experts and have the kind of deep knowledge of these infrastructure projects to make good decisions about it. And this is really a valuable exercise in democracy that we do every year, and that I'm always grateful for. So I'm really happy to see this, and I know that by inviting more people in, we invite in the values of our city, and we know that we're making infrastructure decisions that will last us for many generations. So we know we have to take seriously our commitment to a future that is more equitable than our city is today, our commitment to a future infrastructure that is more climate sustainable than our infrastructure is today. We know we're in a climate emergency. We know we have unresolved inequities in our community that we have to address. And so this is our opportunity. This is one of those places where you can bring your experience and your knowledge of the way those issues play out in your neighborhood and in your community, get into this real exchange and this real mutual investment between the city and all of you, and come out with some really great decisions. And so I'm deeply appreciative of your work. Really excited to hear about the recommendations that you'll come to, and looking forward to keeping in touch. And I'll just echo, do keep in touch with your council members. That's something I've always done out of my office, and I think it really it really is valuable for us to have the kind of informed advice that you all are able to offer as you come through this CLIC process. And I know that the whole community appreciates your work.
Thank you, Councilmember Chair Fletcher and Council President Bender and Mayor Fry. Do the elected officials have time for maybe 3 or 4 questions from CLIC members? We're hoping. Eric Wan has a hand raised already. If that's
Mr. Strand, Mr. Strand, real quick, I have to jump to another meeting in just a couple minutes, given the most recent events, but I'm happy to stay for just a few minutes here before I can.
Okay, then I'll go through the big question. So there is envisioned a once-in-a-lifetime infusion of funds for capital investments coming from Washington, with $2 to $3 trillion being proposed. Is there a design right now for how the public can be engaged in talking about priorities when it comes to infrastructure, since this appears to be the mechanism for public participation in those sorts of spending? That's my question.
Thank you, Mr. Wan. The answer is yes. And very thankfully to our federal government, we are now getting the monies that, quite frankly, we should have gotten 6, 7, 8 months ago in terms of recovery and assistance to our communities. We're looking at, I think it's $281 million in total. Now, those monies are divided the way we're at least setting up the framework into about 7 different areas. The 2 main areas are kind of like immediate and emergency needs, and then more recovery-based needs. The way we're working through the process, which by the way is still morphing as we speak, is we've got these kind of 7 groups that are working together to provide some recommendation. There'll then be quite a bit of community feedback. I make a recommendation, the council then reviews and makes amendments, and then ultimately we adopt. And that's the general framework. Of course, the parts of that process may morph and change over the coming months. One of the issues that we're getting to is that we have the general framework of as to what these dollars are to be used for, but we don't have specific guidelines yet. Those guidelines will be issued, I believe, in late May. And council members, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe late May is when we're anticipating when those guidelines will be issued, and then we'll hopefully be able to get the dollars out as soon as possible. But yeah, we really do value the community input in it. There's quite a bit of money, but that money will be dramatically diminished when you see some of the obligations that we have that are like kind of not optional. But no, yes, the answer is yes, we will be having quite a bit of community feedback.
Are those the rescue dollars that you're talking about, or is that the infrastructure dollars that that Pete Buttigieg is working on right now?
So I was talking about rescue dollars. Now, there are other dollars from Pete Buttigieg that from our Secretary of Transportation that are also coming in. I don't have the exact dollar figure on that pool in front of me anyway. I don't know if Council President or Councilmember Fletcher, if you all do.
This is Amelia Kruver, Budget Director. I'll just chime in and say we know much less even than we do about the rescue plan, about the coming infrastructure plan. So Mayor Fry did a great job of summarizing sort of our plan for the Rescue Act, and that's one where the bill's actually been signed. The transportation stuff is just a lot further down the road. So we're further away from having a plan for that. So I'll just chime in and say that. If Council President and Council Member, if you have anything to add, feel free.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that we are really proactively as a city working to advocate for the passage of infrastructure investments in Congress, and we're really grateful. I mean, Congresswoman Omar's office has been really communicative with the city, just really making sure to highlight. I mean, we do have a little in now because Robin Hutchison abandoned us for the Biden administration, but the Congresswoman has been really proactive in just really advocating for the city. There's also this new earmark situation. Congress has reinstituted earmarks. So as a city, we put together a list of earmarks. Kind of the turnaround time is really fast. So we had to rely on, previous kinds of engagement. I always think we could do more community engagement around our budget that is more proactive instead of the 2 hearings that come, in those last weeks of our budget. And I think there is a great idea to think about the role that CLIC could play in proactively helping think about priorities for future federal dollars. The earmark program is anticipated to be a regular occurrence. So for the next round, we could be more proactive and more community facing and prioritization. This time we just had to send a list of projects to Ilhan and try to get things that we thought could get funded. And then there was also this public facing, nonprofits could apply for earmarks for specific things. So I think the way that the federal government is moving their budgeting is to be more transparent and community focused. I will say that all of the planning work that has been happening for these last years puts us in such a stronger position to be ready to implement infrastructure, our transportation action plan, the Vision Zero plan, the stormwater planning work that Public Works has done, and all of it has been so data driven that it really puts us in a great position. I mean, for the first time ever, we have the city's transit priority map adopted. That's our own thing. It's not some negotiated, sad compromise with the Metropolitan Council. It's our own vision for transit. And of course, we will have to compromise. And of course, we're still part of the region and the state. But it's our vision for how we can advance transit for the city. Like I said, the stormwater management planning was so detailed and focused on the potential, mapping of climate change impacts and how we can do flood mitigation. So we're, I think, more ready than we've ever been. But to your point, there's a big question about prioritization, and especially with questions around, what is the city's role in financing or supporting reconstruction of private properties that have been damaged in unrest, and then kind of as along with all of the other things that we typically do with infrastructure investments and capital. That's just a capital investments. Happy to answer follow-ups. I can stop talking.
Thank you, President Bender, and I think Mayor Fry had to depart. Just by the way, in the CLIC schedule, we have a public input session, 5:30 p.m., April 21st and May 6th, and then a joint public hearing with Planning Commission on May 12th, 6 p.m. John Bernstein, I think, is next.
Yeah, I just want to address something that both the mayor and I think Lisa Bender just stated, that is I think in past years, in recent experience, it has been accurate. It was not accurate this past year, and I want to identify it for a specific reason, and that is the amount of the percentage of our recommendations that the council actually adopts. It was way off this past year, way off. I'll give you some numbers. These are dollar numbers. Over the 6-year period, 2021 to 2026, you guys funded 26% more dollars than we recommended. So we recommended just over $1 billion. You adopted almost $1.3 billion. And that if you look at that by year, that range from underfunding in 2022, that's the only year that you underfunded, to overfunding as much as 84% in 2026. So you almost doubled what we recommended in 2026. So I point that out for this reason. We try to stay very close to what you guys adopt for net debt bond funding, which is sort of what guides all of this. Everything flows down from that. Our recommendation last year was within 10% of what you guys adopted back in February. And we recognize that that number might have become inaccurate as the year went on, although ironically, our assumption is it might have gone down and it actually went up dramatically. So my request is that whatever you guys adopt is realistic in terms of whatever you guys set for net debt bond funding over the 6-year period, stick to that so that when we make a recommendation to you, it makes sense. I mean, you guys went way over what you had recommended to us, and it makes our work less useful if you do that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think in retrospect, and this is sort of speaking to the compressed timeline that we had, is I think that there were changes in the mayor's recommendations that frankly ended up not being part of the budget process, in a way that got presented to us in a lot of detail, and I think that points to an opportunity for us to work more closely with the CLIC. I think there actually might be a value in sort of adding a meeting or adding a component to a meeting to have a more detailed CLIC presentation to the full council, because I don't think in the overviews that we got from the budget director and in the overviews that we got from staff related to the mayor's recommendations, that was never sort of highlighted to us. It was something that we noticed kind of towards the end and kind of didn't address, knowing that it was more a future year problem. But I do think that it's something that we can do better at and be more intentional in the process about. So I would be interested in some follow-up conversations to think about how we can best do that to make sure that we're getting a really clear presentation from the CLIC about what their recommendation to council is.
I appreciate that response.
Thank you,
and
Chair
actually
Fletcher.
that was what inspired my comments at the beginning, is that we don't hear about the capital budget from our constituents. We just don't. And so we are just getting inundated with requests and demands for meetings related to things that are not in the capital budget. And I think that's why I kind of highlighted there would be a big value in CLIC members just having scheduled meetings with their council members that appointed them to make sure that if there were changes in the mayor's proposed budget from what CLIC recommended, that it's highlighted for the council members, that if there are any particular projects you had questions about or flags, or like I said, over the years, there have been some policy recommendations coming out of this body. I've found those meetings very valuable in the past. And yeah, I just want to encourage folks to, we pay attention when you contact us. So, and you're, really, you are kind of like the only people who generally contact us about capital programming at budget time. So even just more highlighting the important role of this group.
Thank you, President Bender and Chair Fletcher. I think your idea may have been in effect within the past 10 years. I would say perhaps even less, having CLIC presenting at the City Council Committee. So do we have time for 2 more questions? We had Willie Bridges and Katie Jones.
Question for President Bender. When the mayor talks about underserved community, what is he saying that needs to be done, and what is it that you are aware that we need to be looking at?
I don't know what the mayor meant, but I can tell you that as a city, we have adopted. So I actually don't. Do you remember exactly what he? I don't remember exactly what he said even.
Sorry, I'm back and sort of taking
hi.
2 meetings here. I did not totally hear the question though.
What is it that you made reference to underserved community. What is it that you expect us to be looking at of providing service to the communities?
Well, it's a really good question. I think this was to Council President Bender's point earlier. Much of what we hear during these budget cycles don't really focus on click recommendations or capital long-range improvement projects at all. A lot of them are more programmatic in terms of the feedback. Now, that doesn't mean that the programmatic changes exclusively impact issues of racial justice and some of the deep systemic inequities we've seen. There are systemic inequities based on where and how capital long-range improvement projects are centered, what neighborhoods they're located in. Are we making sure to value communities of color and make investments there, and in terms of the prioritization itself. And that's one of the more difficult things to do is you look across the city. Of course you want to make sure that those, for instance, roads that need repair get repaired. But you also want to make sure that communities that have systemically been underserved and left behind don't get left behind going forward. And so that applies to human development projects, that applies to playgrounds, that applies that applies to even sewers and how we deal with our water. And so I think there's a broad range in terms of what I mean. There's not one specific thing, but I think really apply that lens is what I would ask. And I think that would certainly benefit.
Thank you.
Katie Jones.
Yeah. Oh, and just quickly, sorry. I did have a couple additional thoughts. I think we're one of the first cities in the country to use race equity and economic equity criteria in our capital programming for transportation. And we followed the example of the park board, which was using this strategy for parks capital. And I think it's helpful to always just check in and make sure that that's working. So we know our intention is to make sure that our capital investments are using race equity and economic equity as a criteria for project selection, but is our formula working in the way we intend it? Are we getting the results that we really want? So I think that's an important question because you see the projects in front of you more than anyone else in the city, really, except for the staff. And then I think, so if we're both on a project by project basis, each year, I guess, like for each year's capital budget, but then also over time, is the formula working the way we want it to at a policy level? We've also adopted, I think you probably are aware of these different geographic areas of the city, green zones and cultural districts, where our intention is to focus resources, some programmatic like the mayor talked about, but others infrastructure. So it's another place where I think it's helpful to see, is that strategy working? Is it really meeting the goals that we wanted to? And are there new ways that we could leverage those existing designations from a capital perspective? And then I think the other thing is, and this might expand a bit beyond like the click process, but in order to do a function, government needs to staff that thing appropriately. And we staff some things much better than other things. I mean, our public works department has a lot more resources per item that they're doing than the health department does. It's just the fact. And so, there's a relationship here. So, for example, if we cancel the water yard project and reinitiate a process to locate a water yard in a different location and also commit to doing a redevelopment project at the city-owned site, that takes staff resources, and we either have to add staff resources or other projects will be delayed. And right now we're very compartmentalized. So that would likely mean it would affect projects like Upper Harbor Terminal and reopening Nicollet Avenue or other type things that are like redevelopment. I'm just using that as an example because it's timely, but generally speaking, as we look to like the infrastructure opportunities in the Biden administration, I mean, we also need to make sure that we're appropriately staffed for the functions that we're trying to do. And so I think it's another place where your recommendations about what to prioritize are important. So for example, if we started to think about taking more of a interest in financing redevelopment for some reason than the city has for most of recent years, that would require some restructuring of how staff is oriented in the city. So it's not as simple just moving capital money around. We also have to make sure that we're staffed appropriately to meet the goals that we're trying to achieve, in particular around race equity. And a part of the reason I use that example was because the worst case scenario is we have projects or functions that are intended to correct for race equity over time that are putting sort of pitting that work against each other instead of fully investing in the things that are getting us to race equity and economic equity goals.
Thank you. Katie Jones.
Yeah, hi, council members and mayor. I just wanted to respond to the point about more infrastructure funding coming to the city and how this, how this body can be helpful in that way. I mean, we've had kind of the same, I mean, I've been on CLIC for 4 or 5 years now, and we kind of have a set report style. And wondering, and to date, new projects have kind of come through us because people will show up at the public hearing and we'll hear about things like sidewalk gaps is one project I can think of. And then the North Side Greenway were 2 that we put in as comments, and then they've come back the next year as actual projects from Public Works. And so to date, that has been the only pathway I've understood as a way to get for the community to recommend that a project become a project to Public Works. And if they're, especially given the new opportunity or potential opportunity for funding, should we be adding an additional section or at least a part of our comments that are like, these are the projects that we're hearing about listed and with the kind of level of support that we're hearing about them, and making space for that in a more formal way? Would that be beneficial to the council?
I think yes. I mean, I think that there's some, potentially some value for that. I also think, we've been challenging, through our finance staff and program staff to think about putting more options in front of you all, right? I think the feedback that we got at least a couple of years ago was that there was almost just about the amount of projects proposed that we had bonding money for, and so it wasn't as useful a democratic exercise if you're not making priorities and choices, right? And so I think in a lot of cases, the projects that you might be thinking of proposing are things that we don't have developed enough yet that we would have put on that short list, but hopefully they're at least sort of in the hopper, or at least in a sort of broader to-do list. And so putting them in, putting in your suggestions and adding to that, I think is helpful. And I think in general we want to put more options in front of you so that you all can see what the city is thinking about that might not be fully cooked enough yet for capital investment, but that at least could help you start to flag for priorities. So I know some of that work is ongoing. I don't think we've got it perfect yet. So I think let's keep getting feedback on how that's going. But I know there were some steps in the right direction towards this year. So I'm hoping that this process feels a little more, like your role is valuable.
Thank you, Chair Fletcher.
Yeah, and I think it'll be important for us to flag that as we get more information, particularly about any infrastructure investments, that we stay in touch about adding an additional hearing, or I want to make sure that anything that you take the time to do is able to be used and inform decisions. And so, like Councilmember Fletcher said, I think generally speaking that is very valuable, and we'll just want to make sure that you all have the right information to about the timelines of process and exemptions and all the things to make sure that your time is used, that the recommendations are used, and to also just think about any more broadly public-facing engagement that might make sense.
All right, thank you, President Bender. Can the elected officials stay? We may have one more hand raised. Are there any members who have not asked a question? Otherwise, we'll go to Eric. Eric?
Okay, Council President Bender, you mentioned earlier impacts of spending, and in the particular area of equity, I've been trying my darndest to find impact studies to demonstrate their benefits and measurable impacts for investments that we're making as a city. And I found nothing. Someone may have something on a shelf somewhere, but other than what the public school system does in terms of impact studies, it doesn't look like Minneapolis follows up on whether spending has impacts or that it's going in the direction that they want it to go in. So equity is a difficult question to address if you don't do impact studies. Is there a movement perhaps to start seeing if our dollars are resulting in anything?
I mean, I think that's a great comment. And, like, not to sound like a jaded official, but I mean, any new work like that would require resources and, and planning for that. But I think it's a great point, especially as you think about, I think over time, communities have made a lot of assumptions about projects and I think we're not, I think the lieutenant governor talks about this a lot. You collect data for things that you care about. And it really shows, if you don't, if you say you care about something, but you don't have any data about it, you're really telling on yourself, right? And so we talked a lot about the displacement impacts of infrastructure investment, but we don't really measure it. So I'll say this, we have, I think, over time, my time in office, tried to invest in more sort of open data. We've started tracking our housing market with much more reliable data than we had, early on, although it only applies to, it leaves the data is not comprehensive, but we are tracking our housing market. You could do that in particular geographic areas of the city. So I think that there is more, I think we're tracking our transportation data much more robustly. Not just focusing on car travel, but on all modes. So I think there's more raw data there than there has been in the past that you could use to put together, tracking of progress. We also have the Results Minneapolis program, which keeps getting redesigned, that is intended to be tracking our city's progress towards stated and adopted goals. And like I said, we keep redoing it. Because I think it's hard at a city level to identify the things that are measurable that we have data for. But I think that the Results Minneapolis program is the best existing tracking that the city does. And then, for each individual kind of investment there, I mean, especially for public works, I think probably tracks its projects much more than other departments do. And Amelia just turned on her camera. Finance has been talking about this and working on it and trying to figure out how we can align our budget to results and our results to budget. So it's a conversation, and I think one to keep digging into.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a specifically, there are specific kinds of investments. So we have, for example, really good crash data, right? Like we're doing a much better job at tracking car accidents and pedestrian accidents and bicycle accidents. And so specific investments that are designed to create safety towards our Vision Zero goals are much more trackable than other things. I think that it has been a frustration and a conversation that we've been starting around How do we track, for example, the impact on affordable housing of investments that we're making? And there's always this tension about, if you invest in new infrastructure, does that create gentrification and raise housing values and in a way that pushes people out? And I think we're not as good at tracking that as we should be. And there's some really, tricky practical reasons that that's the case, that I think we need to overcome over time. But there's things we're better at tracking than others. But I think it's worth us always thinking about that, and would be worth if you all, as you're contemplating this question, as you're digging into specific projects, if there are things that you would want to see reported back or tracked, if there's a metric that feels meaningful to you, I'd be interested in hearing about that to see if we could track it. I think that actually might be really useful feedback from this committee.
Very good. Well, it's we've heard 45 minutes, and I really appreciate the city elected officials meeting with Click today, providing guidance and priorities. I hesitate to cut the conversation short, but we do have a fair amount of material to go over to help with onboarding new Click members. And I would just like to thank Councilmember President Bender and Councilmember Chair Fletcher and Mayor Fry for attending. So virtual
thank you.
And fantastic dialogue. Staff had identified a couple of items, guilty of putting something in the chat that we'll reference for the public. And then we should move
Jeff,
to item 4.
For the good of the order, I can definitely call those out if needed. We had one comment that was asking about when I believe the best time might be to connect with council members. That probably depends on a couple of things, including when the bulk of the programming is going to be occurring this year, and possibly, any additional guidance that might come out of, an infrastructure bill. I think we can follow up on that, and that might be something also that depends on individual Click members, ongoing communications, I guess, and norms with their council members. But we can definitely follow up, I think, with some guidance on that. I see a hand raised from Amelia. I'm going to call that out too.
I would just add to that. I think Council President Bender said like November, and I think that's a great recommendation. Council members will start hearing presentations from departments on their recommended budget about the very end of September, so really October and November. So that's really when council members will start digesting the mayor's recommended budget. So I think that that would be my recommendation for a timeline, and we can certainly follow up and see if there's anything more precise from electeds.
Thank you. Shall we move to the Click schedule review for 2021?
Yeah, that sounds good.
I
was going to walk us through the next couple of events for the 2021 Click schedule. Justin, did you want to share the full schedule? There we go. So tomorrow is when the capital budget requests are due from the submitting agencies. So that means Robert, Justin, and I will be putting these together onto our OpenGov website and then later onto our Click SharePoint site on Thursday and Friday. And Justin is going to walk us through later how to access that Click SharePoint site. And so that leads us to the first public input session, which Jeff mentioned earlier. That's on Wednesday, April 21st, and it starts at 5:30 p.m. A communication is going to go out through the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department, I think at some point in the next couple of days, with information on how the public can attend that session. Please, I think we're going to also send out an email to Click members so they can share that link with throughout their network. So please feel free to invite people. The sessions are planned to go on as long as there's questions. So 5:30 is like the start time. So if the more questions we have, the longer it goes. So if there's people attending them, we actually have some time to discuss. So that's the first public input session. That's on the 21st. And then the second one is on Thursday, May 6th, also with a 5:30 p.m. start time. And so the next item, which would be the first presentation session, will look a little bit more like last year since we're still doing remote. These are going to be, they're not going to be full day sessions. They're only going to be half day from 8 to 1 p.m. These sessions are going to be, each submitting agency is preparing a presentation before, they're submitting a presentation on the same day that their capital budget requests are due. And so we're hoping to get those posted to the website, and we'll send that out, their presentations out with our link to the presentations out to all Click members. Let's see. And then for the actual presentation day, these are going to look like question and answer sessions. Let's see. I think Justin was going to pull up the agenda for there we go. So this is tentative for right now, but it's an 8 a.m. roll call. And then we'll go through agenda and then do some open discussion and questions. And then at 8:30, departments will start presenting, or excuse me, they'll briefly summarize each of their projects, and then they will be available for questions and answers. So that means that Click members do need to do some pre-work before these half-day sessions. So you will have to watch your presentations beforehand. And so the first day, it looks like John has a question.
Yeah, hi. I just want to make sure that I see you have the breakouts there for a half an hour at the end. So those are we have a lot of new people. At the end of each half day, there's a half an hour allotted where we're going to break up and meet as task forces to categorize the projects that we hear on each day based on some of the capital guideline criteria, specifically the project priority and contribution to city goals. I just want to, half an hour may be optimistic, depending on, it'll vary for each task force. It'll depend on how the projects are broken up on each day and how many new projects there are. So we're going to just have to work till we get it done. So I just want to point that out.
Okay. So we still need to finalize this this agenda with the executive committee. So we will, I think this is just tentative for the moment, but plan on 8 to 1 or I think 1:30. It sounds like, John.
Or start the subcommittees at noon.
Yeah, I mean, it's very possible we can get it done in a half an hour. It's very unpredictable. And so it's best if we don't assume a half an hour. Maybe it'll be a half an hour, maybe it'll be an hour. It's just hard to know. Again, it depends on how the workload as it breaks out. There might be one day that's more transportation heavy and one day that's more HD heavy, just as the way the presentations fall. In addition, if they're new projects, that slows it. And beyond that, if there's people we have a lot of new people, if people have different opinions about what we've done in the past, be more discussion than in the past, and that can slow things down too. So it's very unpredictable is my point. And people shouldn't assume that we're going to be done exactly at 1. To the extent you can, keep your schedule flexible that day.
We have a comment from Dan Miller in the chat that we should call out, and then George Montague.
Yeah, this is Robert. I can do that. So Dan has a question about whether written comments can be submitted at the public input sessions, and who should they be addressed to. Jeff, I might turn this one back to you.
Yes, they have been presented in the past. I'm happy to have them directed to the city, care of the Click Committee, care of myself as chair, with the Finance and Property Facility Services Department referenced if they're electronic mail. Okay. I can put that in the chat. And then George?
Yeah, so just a question as a new member, can you review what we should plan to do prior to the meeting on the half-day meeting so that we make the best use of our time?
So we're gonna, I think Justin will go through the Click SharePoint. That's the best place to see. But we're also going to send an email out with like guidance for all the things that you should be reviewing beforehand and like all the resources as well.
Okay. Okay, that's great. Yeah, because it does look like a fair amount of information to cover, and have some conclusions on at the end of the half day. So I want to make sure we use our time most effectively.
But aside from that, that is the Click schedule for the next few weeks. Is there any other questions?
Yeah, this is Beth Toso, and I was just wondering if you have an idea of how much time these videos are going to take to view. I mean, is this like a couple hours of presentations or 6 hours, or just so that in terms of planning, or if you know that at this point?
Robert, do you remember what it was like last year?
Yeah, I mean, it was at least a couple of hours of presentations. I mean, I would hesitate to say whether it's 3 hours or 6 hours looking at those videos, and reviewing those in conjunction with the capital budget requests. I might turn that back actually to the membership, especially those who went through the session last year.
It varies. It varies. You know, it's like you get the videos, and some can be longer than others, and you're digesting, so it just varies. They're not all the same. I can tell you that much. Some are longer and some are shorter, so it definitely varies.
Right. Also, I would concentrate on those projects that are in your task group, in your task force, because you do want to see them all. You do want to see them all, but if you need to go into, you really want to go through them slowly and perhaps look at them twice, I would do that on those that are in your task force.
Okay, thank you.
Let's go to Katie. Yeah. Katie, and then I think I saw John. Katie and John. Unmute.
Katie, you're on mute.
Huh.
Oh. Let's go to John while go to John while Katie is restarting.
So a couple of points. I'm going to respectfully disagree with what Eric just said. I think it's important that you view all of the projects with equal attention, because we are all individually rating all of them regardless of which task force you're on. And I know Eric is fully aware of that. And maybe he's just suggesting that initially for that day, you need to make sure that you're well aware of the ones that are on your task force. But I would apply equal attention to all of them. And as far as the videos go, I would just suggest this. We all have different learning styles. Some people take in information better reading it. Other people take in information better by hearing it. So if you're one of those people, I would adjust accordingly. I think as you start to go through these projects, you'll quickly learn where the pertinent information is in the CBR, and you actually don't have to read the entire CBR, because some of the information in there in the same spots is not very helpful, while other spots is very helpful. And you may find that you only need to use the videos to add color where something's not clear. If you've read through a bunch of these already and the description of the project is clear and you've read it and you have no questions, you may not need to view the video. Whereas on the other hand, if you view one and it's not clear, you may want to actually look at the video.
Okay, so
well stated.
I agree with John in principle, but I know that many of us are going to say, I can't take 6 hours of this, which is why I always put those that I need to be discussing in a group, do those first, to make sure that we don't delay any of the group discussions. And that's all I'm saying.
Okay, individual style.
Yep.
So members, I think last year we took email questions in advance, so I would anticipate that the staff will have that capacity for efficiency for the Q&A sessions, that we can maybe use the SharePoint. And then again, if new members, especially, if you need to reach out, you know that I'm sure that all the executive committee members are hereby volunteering to be a resource, and You have our roster, you have our contact information. Please don't hesitate to reach out. So I am going to just let the executive committee members know that we thought next week was our week off except for the public input and on the 24th, but we'll need an executive committee meeting on the 21st, say at noon or sometime midday. Only about an hour of your time. And then we should move the agenda because we do have a couple of other sessions. We have the capital budget request and scorecard review and click SharePoint review. So I think time blocking those at 15 minutes each at least. That'll run us up to 1:30 p.m.
Okay. Jeff, are you ready for me to jump in here?
Ready. That was a segue.
Okay. Great. Thank you. And John, feel free to jump in as I go through this. By way of background, this past winter, a team led by Willie did some revisions. We spent a little time with the capital guidelines. So those of you who are new to this process won't know that there were previous guidelines, but those who are returnees, there is a version which shows the changes between what we did last year and what we're doing this year so that you can reorient yourself. And Justin, I believe you're going to put both versions on SharePoint.
Yep, both of those versions, the marked up version from the previous years as well as the current guidelines, are on SharePoint.
Great. So those of us who were here last year, if you want to see what's changed, go to the track change version that's on SharePoint, and you'll see that it's streamlined. There are some fundamental changes that occurred, but nothing too large. Okay, so for those who are new, I'm sharing what I do, and we all have different approaches. For me, the most important tool is to go back to the old Click reports. That sort of gives you a little history about many, if not most, of the projects that are being proposed this year. And that in the shirt, that they'll all be located there. Second of all, there'll be presentations by the departments along with the videos. And as again, there are different approaches here. I prioritize with those that I have to be able to talk to within our task group. And then I go and look at all the others just to make sure that I can be contributing during the discussions. Then there are the CBR, the budget request submissions themselves, and we're going to go through one on North Commons shortly to see what type of information you're going to need to ultimately be gathering as you go through the process of reviewing these projects. So there are other sources which I access, and I mentioned one earlier, which is impact studies. There are a lot of impact studies and other references. If you just Google some of these projects, I won't give any examples, but some of us who are doing the park review for the Minneapolis park system, it helps if you just Google that park and see what the issues are around there, the types of concerns people may have expressed in the past, and if you have a chance, and Robert and I are working on this right now, a chance to see these sites. One of the things we're definitely going to do is create a map so you can see where all these projects are located around the city. So you can sort of, create your own path if you want to go on your own. It's not recommended that you go on the site, but there may be a chance. So the second part is we're going to ask the department, the submitters, to offer to give us tours, or at least access to some of these facilities. One that we're working on is the new public service building. While it's not going to officially open until this fall, we might be able to get in there for an actual customized tour of the new building. And I'm working on that right now, and everyone will be invited. Okay, so impact studies, just go ahead and Google some of these. You'll find some interesting information there. All right, Justin, could we see the capital guidelines document, please? and go to page 2. Okay, so this is the new capital guidelines document that you will all be using. This is sort of the touchstone for our analysis of the projects being submitted. And what I would do is read through this and recognize, after you look at the example I'm about to provide, just start putting information that you're gathering by reviewing these projects into little buckets. And the most important on this page, what you're going to find is at the bottom there, you see goals. There are a total of 8 goals that you're going to have to be ranking things on. So try to study those 8 goals very carefully, because in the end, the projects are going to be able to earn points based on these goals. Okay, then we get to the operational goals. One of the changes that we made this year is to infuse the equity concerns within each of these goals. So the first one is something that we need to understand a little further. And spend diversity means that we're using locally sourced, diverse suppliers to deliver whatever we're going to be spending on. I'll give you an example. There are construction projects going on, and by doing spend diversity, what you would do is access some of the minority-owned businesses in the area to offer them an opportunity and mentoring to become major suppliers for the city. Okay, so you'll want to look at these 4 operational goals because they will come back to you a little later. Now, at the bottom, you'll see priorities, 2019 priorities. Those are not priorities for the year 2019. Rather, these are the priorities that we established in 2019. So you're going to want to see these 3 priorities because you're going to have to be rating the projects on them a little later as well. On the next page, the key there is that link at the bottom, Minneapolis 2040. The 2040 plan is approved and it's policy for us at the moment. So I would go ahead and review the Minneapolis 2040 plan. The projects are going to have to be identified in terms of how they support the objectives and the goals of the 2040 plan. And that will be one of the filters we're going to be applying in rating the projects. Okay, if we can go to the next page. Okay, so point allocations. This is the goal here. So the maximum that any project can get is 300 points. And that's each of us is going to be rating each project along those lines. So when you get this document, you see project priority, and there's section 1 on project priorities. The 4 classifications you can give points on, and just give an example. For example, critical. The way to indicate that a project is critical based on level of need is to give it a point range of somewhere between 55 and 65. So what I would do is just go through the 4. On the next page, you'll find something called desirable. That would be the lowest point range, which is 26 to 40. Okay, and sorry, I'm watching the clock here because we have a lot more to get through. This year, okay, so there's something new here. Next page, please. One of the allocations of points that we're giving is the number of years that a project has been submitted for funding. So basically you get credit for persistence. So if you're persistent, it must mean it's a high priority to your department, and thus the escalation of points there. If something's been submitted for 6 years, a project or a program leader must have determined that they really need this, and that's why we start increasing the number of points they get. Okay, let's go to the next page, page 7, please. Okay, qualitative criteria. This is where you have the most flexibility because this is all you. There's no real guidelines early on in the first 3 pages of this document. This is where I find the greatest flexibility for you to evaluate how this project contributes to the city. And each of these has been reconfigured from previous years. So you'll see 6 of these qualitative criteria. There's a section there which is, you'll see intent, which is italicized. That's to give you a deeper understanding of what is meant by the words next to the bullet. And if it's still unclear, it would be useful to contact your chair or vice chair for your task group. And then on the last page is the click rating summary. So you can see the relationship, how the points all add up to 300 at the bottom. Okay, before I go to the example, are there any questions? Okay, if not, let's go to the example. The example we're using is the North Commons. All right, so this is what you'll see for a typical project, and in this particular case, it's the NPRB's request for a project that's been around for a little while, and if you read a little further, you'll see that they're saying this is I believe this is in the last year. Could you scroll down, please, Justin? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so there's a project description, purpose of justification, and let's keep scrolling down. I want to get to the very bottom where we get to the. Okay, let's stop there for a second. You'll see some of these projects will have visuals like this, and I would use this if you want to visit the site to have a look, because this is the plan, and it may not look like what it really is right now. This is what it looks like developed. Okay, and then to the very bottom. Okay, further down. So you next, please. Okay, this is where we get to. These are the operating impacts. Okay, let's go a little further. Here we go. Public safety. So right here, these are the city goals that each of the budget submitters needs to explain. So if you go to the front of the guidelines on page 2, you'll see all of the city's goals identified. Public safety being the first one, housing being the second, and you'll find all of the scroll down. You'll see all of the city's goals along with a summary, which is in bold. And I think that's about all the information you'll be getting. And with that, it's 1:15.
Thank you, Eric.
Yep.
John has a hand raised, probably wants to comment.
Yeah, if it's okay, can I just make a couple of points on this?
Yep.
Justin, can you put the rating summary back up? I just want to go through that really quickly. While he's doing that, I would just also comment on where on the last part that Eric showed, where the CBR's comment on how each project contributes to city goals. I would just caution everyone that, not surprisingly, when a department is putting together these CBRs, they adopt sort of used car salesman type tactics, right? It's amazing how, as you read through these, every project contributes to every single one of those city goals. So take it with a grain of salt. I personally find it to be kind of boilerplate, Most of this, for the most part, I think you'll find that you can assess for yourself how much it meets city goals or does not meet city goals, and where there are areas that are not clear, that's what the Q&A is for. That's where you can specifically ask about a specific project and how it's meeting a certain aspect of a city goal if it's not clear from what's given in the CBR. And again, I would say that the project, you'll probably be able to discern that information better from the project description than from how they address it under city goals. All right, so quickly on this page, I just point out a couple of things. Again, the task forces will rate each of these projects on project priority. So that's that level of need, critical, significant, important, or desirable. So from that point, all you need to do is give it points within the range that it's given. So if a project is rated significant by HD, then the idea is to stay within that 41 to 50 points. You are not required to do that. Years ago, you did have that was required. Now you can go outside of that if you have strong feelings, but the idea is generally you stay within the recommendations of the task force. Same is true for city goals a little bit further down the page here. That will be categorized by each task force, so all you have to do is stay within that range. Just to be clear on this thing up here where it says consecutive years in budget requests, there is nothing we have to do as scores on that. The city department, the city staff will take care of that for us. That's just factual. Either it's been in for 1 year or it's been in for 4 years, whatever that is, that will be pre-filled out for you. You have nothing you need to do there other than if you're questioning whether it's factually accurate, but beyond that, there should be nothing to do there. Operating costs, city staff on this one, I don't know if we can get this change made to the CBRs, but we're now trying to look at this as a percent of total investment and not just absolute dollars. Many of us can make that calculation. That might be challenging for some people on the committee. We're a very diverse group. Some people are numbers oriented, some are not. If there's not a way to get that changed on the CBRs, maybe a sheet could be distributed that gives that information to people. And then finally, I don't have anything to add on what Eric said about qualitative criteria. I agree with him that that's an area where you have, it's obviously very qualitative in nature. I mean, reality is this whole thing is far more qualitative than the numbers suggest that it is, which is generally the case for these things. But that's where you really have a lot of flexibility to put your own stamp on how you view a given project. Thanks.
And we have Willie Bridges, Vice Chair.
I think one of the things that's important, what Eric and John are saying about the scoring, you have to ask questions. Sometimes what has happened is there's money that's there already and they haven't spent it and they're asking for more. Feel free to ask questions, because if you don't ask those questions when you're looking at scoring, you're not going to understand it. Because sometimes they'll come back and it keeps building up and we wonder, what are you doing with this project? And so feel free to ask those questions.
Okay, so to follow the process, a couple more steps. After you fill in, after you score things, that's not the end of the story. Well, what happens is we meet together as a task force and we sort of distill the sentiment of our task force on each of these projects. So please come prepared to discuss these projects one by one with your task force. And then we circle back and we meet in plenary with the entire clique to validate what we've done within our task force. John, do you have anything else there?
No, I don't think so. I just would reiterate, since we have more new people, that despite the fact that we're divided into separate task forces, we each individually rate all of the projects, and you have equal opportunity to make a comment on any project. Just because you're on the transportation task force does not mean you can submit a comment on an HD project. It just means you're not in that meeting where they're discussing it, but you just have to forward it via email to the appropriate people.
I'm going to add one more thing. John's used a really important word, comment. As you're doing this, remember that we have an opportunity to write comments within the CLIC report, which express some broader policy or a request for more studies into the future. So if you have any questions, you have any thoughts that are of a higher level, keep them on a notepad, and we'll circle back later to talk about which should be turned into narrative as a comment within the CLIC report.
I would just add one more thing. I just want to reiterate what Jeff said. I am more than happy to walk anybody through any confusion or questions they may have. My contact information is on the roster. You're free to email me, you can text me, you can call me. I'm happy to help anybody that's got any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Willie. And for the public, I'm just requesting an executive committee meeting on the Wednesday, the 21st, to do a final review on our public info session that evening and the CLIC committee member presentation Q&A on the 24th. So now we want to take item number 7, review our CLIC SharePoint. Has anyone not been able to get into the SharePoint site? Justin.
Yeah, happy to just quickly cover this in the interest of time. If you have not been able to access the SharePoint site, please feel free to reach out to any of us board staff directly. We're happy to walk you through it. This is an internal page within the City of Minneapolis network, so you do need a username and a password to access the page. So if you're coming up to that username and password and you're unsure what to use, it does require a Microsoft account. And that account is set up based on the email address that you are receiving your Teams meeting invites, what's on the roster, whichever email we have on file. That's the one that gives you access to this page. That will be your username. And then you create a password based on that with a Microsoft account. So if you have any questions on getting access to the page, I don't want to really take too much time going through getting access. It's easier just if we meet one-on-one and cover that separately. Once you do get into the page, as you can see, trying to just make this a helpful one-stop shop for CLIC members. We have the upcoming meeting schedule, so you can click in and see meetings, and then also have links to join the team meetings and a little bit about the event as well. We have quick links. A lot of the information for CLIC is on different pages. Some of it's in LIMS, our committee pages right here. If you want to go access previous reports for CLIC, look at the adopted budget, what did the mayor recommend in relation to what CLIC recommended, and then the council adopted. You can get to all City of Minneapolis recordings. So a lot of just helpful links there. 2020 CBRs and presentations are all linked here as well. So if you were to click into this link, you can see the CBR requests. All of them are on this page. So you can access any previous CBR. We're going to create a landing page just like this for this year. So you'll be able to click there, and then also each individual department, you can click into that page, see the presentations. This one had multiple presentations, and then you can see the CBRs related to each presentation under that presentation as well. We do have one department or project that is already submitted for 2021. So if you go on the SharePoint page, you can view that. It is Art in Public Places. The presentation is uploaded here, and then you can click into the CBR here. So review on these presentations and CBRs can really begin at your leisure. We will continue to update this page with the presentations and the CBRs as we get them. The due date is tomorrow. We're hopeful that we will be able to quickly add CBRs and presentations to this page, split between day 1 and day 2 on the presentation schedule. Documents, you can find the documents here. Task forces, if you have specific documents you want to share with CLIC, we can add those there. That's also accessible through the Teams app. And then our meeting recordings, if you are unable to attend a meeting and want to go back, those are posted to the City of Minneapolis YouTube page, and you can click here. So just kind of a one-stop shop, again, like I said, to get the information that you need. If there's anything that you think would be helpful to have on this page, feel free to reach out to staff. We can customize it to fit your needs.
Questions, John?
Yeah, so
Comments?
this one might be directed more to Robert. Robert, can you make sure that the PDFs of the CBRs, boy, that's a lot of acronyms, don't require us to drill in further? We had this problem at the beginning of last year. If you could upload them in a way so that all of the details of the funding sources, etc., are available without having to click in further on each one. With 120 of these, every click, you multiply by 120, it really slows down the process. So if there's a way to make sure that all of that exists there, yep, like that.
Right. So does this one that we have up on the screen look like the configuration you're used to and would anticipate?
Yeah, go down to the Department Revenue requests.
This one might just be the one category here.
So yeah, this is the, right. I mean, is that net debt bonds?
Yeah, so that would be net debt bonding.
So I don't, it may not be fixable at this point, but it would be good to know. Typically, it is net debt bonds, but there are other bond sources. So bond activity doesn't really, it's a whole lot.
Yeah, we might be kind of limited.
Robert, I may be able to pull up a previous one because I think there were examples with more categories.
Thanks, Justin.
I don't want to belabor this right now, but just to the extent that you can get whatever information is in these, if you can make sure it's all on the PDF without having to do a bunch of clicking in further.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And so this one has bond activity and special assessments, which would be the two major categories of funding for this project.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Eric, and then I want to make sure that we also have all accessibility options available this year. Eric and Robert.
Okay, yeah, I just have a quick suggestion. Many of these presentations have contact numbers and email addresses for questions. I would suggest if you can hold those questions for the presentations rather than contacting them individually, that would be to the benefit of the entire task force, well, the entire CLIC. So, you know, unless there's a really pressing question you need answered, I would hold back until we get our presentation. Thanks.
Robert.
So I had two quick follow-ups. One was related to the actual CBR forms. This year we were planning on publishing the link that takes you to each of those individual web pages for each of those CBRs. I think in years past we've assembled a giant PDF folio and saved that out to our website. I think we still have to do that for posterity so we can document the CBRs that we had this year. But right now the plan is to simply post this page, which takes you to each of those individual landing pages for the CBRs. And then with the videos, we'll be posting the videos along with the links to the CBRs that are covered in the videos, just for ease of navigation. And so CLIC members can kind of click through everything. We definitely received feedback and heard feedback that the PDF is largely unnavigable unless you're planning on scrolling back and forth through the document, whereas the source documents, which are already in OpenGov, are certainly much easier to use. I had a second follow-up, Jeff, and this is more related to, we've got a potential Wednesday meeting ahead of the public input session next week. I think we'll review some of the details for the meeting at that time, but I just want to be really clear for the written comments, since we didn't do this last year and I wasn't involved in 2019, I just want to be extra explicit, is the idea that we would collect written responses from the public for that meeting and then forward those on to you as CLIC chair for, I guess, management during the meeting? Or is there another approach that we've been thinking of for that? Just because we gotta, if we're gonna post stuff and post notices, we gotta tell how to actually get those written comments in. And we can follow up later. I don't need to do it with the group.
We could refer them to the joint public hearing, in which case they end up in the CLIC report, but we did have people provide valuable information at the public info sessions in past years.
Okay.
I'll catch you offline.
Okay.
Willie, I think you may have the last. We have people who have hard stops at 1:30. It is 1:30.
Well, one of the things I would suggest, look at some of the past reports. It's on that page. Look at some of the history, give you an idea of what has been done in the past. That's really important. And I think that would help the new people to understand. You got the committee reports, you got the budget requests, everything's there. So I would suggest look at that.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? I think we're good. I'll read the closing remarks in that case. So just again, for the taxpayers who may be watching this later, the CLIC agenda and documents are in the city's legislative information management system, LIMS, lims.minneapolismn.gov. So With that, we've completed all items on the agenda for this meeting. I'll ask members and staff if there are any other matters to come before this meeting. Seeing no hands raised, if not and without objection, I'll declare this meeting adjourned. Our next meeting will be the public info session at 5:30 p.m. on April 21st. I'm sorry, April 21st, 2021. So that concludes our meeting today. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.